Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Product Manager podcast, where we go beyond frameworks and resumes and dive deep into mindset, strategy, and visibility required to become a top 1% product leader. I'm your host, Shobit Chugh. Now, today's guest, one of the most exciting voices in health tech and AI, Anu Ramakrishnan. She's built FDA-approved AI products, designed connected health ecosystems at Samsung. She's redefining what it means to lead with both technical rigor and deep empathy in the digital health space. She's also a proud immigrant, mentor, and a recipient of the EB-1A visa, also called the Einstein Visa, for her extraordinary contributions in product leadership. Anu, welcome to the Intentional Product Manager Show.
Thank you so much, Shobit. I'm super excited to be here and also really appreciate that intro. I think I wanted to also say that you're doing a phenomenal job helping the product community through IPM. So really excited to have this conversation with you.
Let's start with some warm-up questions just to get going. Tell me what's something people would be surprised to learn about you, like even with all the public wins, and I know you're very active on LinkedIn, but what's something people would be surprised to learn about you?
The surprising thing about me is that I'm actually an introvert. Nobody wants to believe that somehow, but yeah, I actually find a lot of pleasure in the sense I try to fill my cup doing things in solitude, whether it's cooking or creating or, just maybe even just watching a TV show. So, I love to socialize. I love meeting people, but it does drain my cup. So I do need a little bit of a recharge at the end of the day.
I know I'm in the exact same boat.
I can
Speaking
tell.
all the time, and then I'm exhausted, and I love cooking as well. Mm-hmm. It's so much fun just to do that with quiet and listening to something. You've worked across consumer tech, healthcare, and if you had to pick one of these worlds, I know it's like picking one of your kids, but if you had to, which one would it be and why?
Yeah, this is actually a very tough one, but I would say consumer tech. The reason I say that is because, even if you're in the business of digital health, right, you're still serving people day in and day out through your products, and customer empathy, behavioral science, all of that continues to stay at the very core of what you do even within digital health. And so I think the other thing I would also say is that consumer tech, like historically, innovation has just happened at a much faster pace in consumer tech, which in turn has also helped the healthcare industry make advancements as well. So I think from both of those perspectives, I would say I think leaning more towards the consumer health side, or consumer tech side. But honestly, if I could have it, I would have both.
Now, when did you first know that product was your thing?
Yeah, great question. I think this would have to have been my very first rodeo with mobile app development. This was at a startup that I worked at right out of grad school. And I think it was at that time when it felt like that project really brought together everything I was, super passionate about. User behavior, design, logic, customer experience, launching products with the, end goal of really putting something out there in the real world. In a certain sense, I think at the time I was really doing product management without having that official title or recognition, but really absolutely enjoyed that craft. And so when I figured that you could actually do this as a full-fledged career path, I was like, yeah, sign me up. So I think that was the moment.
It's funny how people end up in product, but at some point they're like, I want to do this forever.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I feel like when I talk to other people of my age, and this dates me a little bit, but talk to people in, a similar cohort, I think most of us stumbled upon product, right? It was not like we just, decided to do this, took a course to become a product manager, and then boom, made that happen. I think we were all sort of maybe doing this in other disciplines and then somehow stumbled our way into this and really kind of made it an official career path. So, which is great because I think, we bring in so many diverse perspectives to the role, right? Which has also shaped the role to what it is today.
I can't tell you how many times I have this conversation where somebody's like, okay, sure, but here's my biggest career problem. I don't come from a traditional product background. And I'm like,
what is that?
What is a traditional career? Exactly.
Yeah.
What is that? Okay, so now we're going to switch. We're going to talk a bit more about AI and health beyond just like hype. AI solves everything. We know it doesn't, but let's get into something real. So you've actually delivered FDA-approved AI-powered health products, and that's pretty rare as a combination. So how do you approach building AI products that have to drive these real outcomes that affect people's lives?
Yeah, great question. Honestly, I feel like I've been doing AI even before AI was a revolution, which I think speaks to the fact that it has such an impact in the field of healthcare. So I think in terms of approach, right? I mean, just like in consumer tech, product management, you always start with a business problem, right? Like, hey, what are we looking to improve? Are we trying to bring in revenue? Are we trying to, grow our user base? So everything always starts with a business problem. But in the world of healthcare, you almost always start with a health outcome, right? Before even getting to the business metrics. So right from the like visioning stage of the product process, we always start by asking, what clinical problem does this product or this feature solve for the end user? Whether that end user is a patient or a clinician. And again, these problems, or I guess this clinical problem could be something like providing a faster or more accurate way to diagnose something, or creating new biomarkers for a disease that maybe never existed before, creating avenues for people to learn more about that and see how they can improve. Or even helping clinicians, spend less time doing admin work so they can do what they love, which is seeing patients, right? So everything always starts with a very tangible, clearly identified clinical problem, which is also then tied to specific clinical endpoints, right? So in the example of like creating novel biomarkers, right? So let's say that we're saying, hey, at my last job, we actually developed a brand new biomarker for brain function, which was tied to early onset of Alzheimer's disease. And so a lot of the focus in that problem space was to really identify, hey, what are the clinical endpoints that we're looking to target, and how do we really validate that this product is moving those clinical outcomes or endpoints in a positive way, right? So even before getting to like product validation in the traditional sense of how consumer PMs might perceive it, there's a lot of clinical validation that typically happens behind the scenes, right? And so clinical validation typically, and especially in the context of AI products, comes down to things like sensitivity or positive predictivity of the algorithm, looking at things like, safety and bias. So again, these are all very tangible endpoints or outcomes that are sort of defined early in the product process, whether it's in a PRD or in a systems requirement document, and are also validated as the product development process advances, right? So we're not just doing like user testing or user validation, which obviously is a very important aspect of AI products as well when we think about how they're actually utilized by patients. We also do a lot of robust clinical validation on the algorithms as well as the artifacts itself, right? And so this typically happens either through clinical studies where we might partner with research institutions or universities to really kind of make that happen. Or it could also happen, with like validated test data sets, right? So like, for example, there's in the space of cardiovascular health or cardiology, there are a lot of like validated data sets that can already be leveraged by companies that are building models to serve different use cases, right? So validation can look very different depending on the product. So essentially, like going back to kind of the approach, there's a very strong emphasis on outcomes right from the get-go. And this continues to sort of evolve in the product development process all the way through to launch and beyond. And I think about like 5 to 7 years ago, like the real world outcomes terminology was like thrown around a lot. And rightly so, because I think, especially in the world of like drug development, right? Like you might be able to prove that a product is safe and effective within a control setting. But how do you replicate that in the real world when you're actually having patients consume it? There's all kinds of things that get added to the mix. There's like patient comorbidities, there's like non-adherence, right? So how does the validation translate into real world when these products are actually being used by real patients? So I think, honestly, yeah. So I think like from that perspective, I would say like that is the approach, that's the mindset. But of course, with that also comes the traditional stuff that you would expect with any consumer health product, right? At the end of the day, healthcare businesses also need to make money. We also need to grow our user base, right? We also need to like enter new markets. So I think that also, sort of emphasizes why product can be a little bit more challenging in healthcare, because you have that like duality of supporting clinical efficacy, but you also have to ultimately help drive outcomes for the business.
You stated a lot about the challenges, the trade-offs in this space. When you think of, let's say, a product manager who's new to the space, what are some of the things they might get wrong initially?
Yeah, that is a great point. I think I would say like for PMs who are maybe new to the digital health space or the healthcare industry, I think building that clinical context goes a long way. I remember in pretty much every job I've had as a healthcare PM, I've spent a lot of my initial 30 to 45 days reading like scientific or clinical papers on the actual domain, right? Really understand like, hey, what are the nuances that are applicable to this space? What are things that like from a defining outcomes perspective, right? Like what actually matters for this domain. So I think that is very nuanced in digital health. Like I don't think PMs in other spaces read papers as part of the job, but I think to me that would be my biggest advice. Like really get familiar with the clinical domain you're in. And of course, a lot of this also comes from the discovery work that you would be doing as a PM, right? Again, like in a consumer product, consumer tech product, you're probably talking to like users of the product, you're probably talking to potential partners, there's like VOC discovery. But in healthcare, there's a lot of like scientific discovery as well, right? You learn a lot when you talk to physicians or clinicians or even like researchers. So I think, yeah, that also helps kind of augment the understanding. And so to go back to like what they get wrong, I think I would kind of flip the question to be like, how can you get it right? And I think to me, I would say building that context is very empowering. And then also defining these outcomes and really understanding, hey, what is that clinical problem right from the start? I think gives you something very strong to anchor to.
It also reminds me of a question I didn't think of before, but it's actually pretty critical. I come across a lot of PMs who want to get into healthcare, but domain knowledge is highly valued and none so more than healthcare. Like I've seen that as a tough entry point. When you've seen people make that leap into healthcare, it's like, what are some of the things they did that enables them to do that?
Yeah, this is a tough question to answer. And also probably my answer might be very biased considering I have a biomedical engineering degree. I sort of like started with the intention of like doing something in the space. But that being said, I think honestly that could be a little bit of a myth in my opinion, because from everything I've seen in the digital health industry, at least within product teams, we actually welcome people without that healthcare domain expertise as much as we welcome people with the domain expertise, right? And I'll give you examples. So, for example, our product team has, the typical kind of stack, right? We have our designers, we have researchers, we have, a full stack development team. We honestly want the best in consumer tech to come to healthcare, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to build experiences that are, very, very user-centered. They actually, are delightful to use. They're easy to use, right? And they actually drive business outcomes for the product at the end of the day, right? And so we're also very much thinking about user funnels, we're thinking about barriers, we're thinking about product metrics in a very similar way to like what maybe a Meta or a Netflix PM would, right? So we actually welcome people who can bring that perspective, especially if it's a, software product. I think there's a lot more kind of preference actually for people who come in with that domain expertise, right? And usually what also ends up happening is there is a clinical expert on the team one way or the other, right? We typically actually always embed clinicians in the product development process. And so even if the PM doesn't necessarily have that knowledge and there is no expectation for you to have that knowledge necessarily, you do always have a counterpart that you can rely on heavily to fill that gap, right? So I think, yeah, I would say, yes, I think like there is definitely, as with any industry, there is a natural kind of preference to navigate or have bias towards someone who brings in that experience. But that being said, I do feel like healthcare is very welcoming of diverse perspectives and it's very much needed as well.
Love it. It's a great perspective, and it will give hope to a lot of people who want to make that transition. They find it hard. So now let's talk a bit more about your own career story, especially as an immigrant. I read you came to the US as a 17-year-old bioengineering student. Now you're leading health tech at one of the biggest companies. So what are maybe some of the biggest mindset shifts you've had to make in your journey from, hey, I'm new here, I hope I belong here, to I'm leading a major industry?
I think essentially it came down to three things. The first one was really becoming comfortable being the dumbest person in the room. And I say this especially being an immigrant student at a university where I'm surrounded by people who are 10x smarter than I am, and also probably have had a lot more kind of context into the education system coming in, right? I think initially I used to find it very, I felt like it hurt my self-esteem to be in a class where everyone else was acing their midterms, we're just seemed to get everything on the first try. And for me, I had to do all this additional work to catch up, right? But then honestly, it was great to have that experience early on, because I started to get comfortable with it and I started to really use that as my strength, right? So that which brings me to the second point, which is, I think doing my homework diligently and really thinking about how do I best equip myself to overcome any shortcomings I might bring to the table, right? So I think in terms of, that was another mindset shift, which is don't ever go into a meeting, without doing any prep, right? Always make sure that you know who you're talking to, do your research about the people you're going to be meeting with, do your research about the topic. It could be, anything as simple as you're taking a recruiting call, or you're actually going to present or pitch something at a competition, right? So I think the aspect of doing my prep became very core to how I operate, not just as a PM, but also operate as a person. So I think that was a second mindset shift. And then lastly, I think self-advocacy, right? I think it's easily said than done for sure, especially I think coming from a country like India, where I think you're always kind of told growing up, don't, blow your trumpet, be humble, right? Just put your head down, do the work, and the rest will follow. I think that was the biggest mindset shift to overcome, where I'm no one's here to look out for me except for myself, right? So the whole put your head down, do the work, and the rest will follow is such wrong advice. So I think for me it was trying to first realize that, okay, I need to stand up for myself. I need to be able to talk about my work, and then also create the opportunities if they don't exist, right? And as an example, at my very first job out of grad school, when I started my career essentially, I kind of came in with this mindset of oh yeah, if your manager tells you to do things, just get it done and deliver it on time, and do a good job delivering it, and the rest will follow. And nothing followed, right? It's things were just status quo. Oh, you're doing this, great. Here's 10 more things to add to your plate, which is great. But also at the same time, I think it was realizing that, hey, I might actually need to have a conversation about what is next for me in this role. And also tying back to how I transitioned to product, right? As I mentioned, I worked on this project as a product manager without a title, or without that role defined. But it was also an opportunity to have that conversation with senior leadership and be hey guys, there is a big void here for product management within our team. And I've kind of been sort of moonlighting as one already through this project. And here's, all the outcomes that this has driven for the team. So how about, considering converting me to an official product manager, even if I might be the first one in the company to be that, right? So I think it was a lot of being uncomfortable, being very open with somebody saying no, but then at least being thankful that you had that conversation and you planted that seed, right? So I think the self-advocacy piece to me has been the biggest mindset change as an immigrant kind of transitioning into a product leader.
Especially that last point resonates so much and ties into a question I had for you, which is, if you think of many of our listeners who are immigrants, they're navigating leadership roles and they might feel unseen or underleveled. What advice would you have for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I've personally endured quite a bit in my career too. I would say, I think the first thing I would recommend is have a game plan, right? And the game plan typically requires some amount of research first, like to be like, hey, is this really a problem or is this something I'm making out to be a problem? Especially around the leveling thing, right? Because I'll be honest, I too used to associate like titles to impact, to be like, oh, I had to be a director to have this impact in my role, or I have to be an X to have a Y. But oftentimes, like, impact does not require having a title. And I've also been in roles where I've had the title, but I've had no room to make impact, right? So I think trying to understand, like, first of all, is this a real problem or is this something I'm making out to be a problem? The second thing is doing research to be like, what does it really mean to be at a level, right? Because this was another thing that I felt like I had to learn the hard way, where before you go and say, hey, I want that senior promotion or I want that principal promotion, really try to understand what is expected of that role and have you actually done things to show that you can operate and think at that level, right? And of course, that can also look very different organization to organization, right? And sometimes those playbooks are defined, but sometimes they're not. And this is, again, going back to that self-advocacy piece where you're maybe shooting for a title, you probably don't know what it actually takes to be at that title. Maybe you have it in your head, but you need to actually validate it. Doesn't hurt to go have a conversation to be like, hey, can we start to define what that role actually requires, where I stand today, and what gaps I need to fill, right? And oftentimes, like, I do believe that managers do want to support their team, right? They do want to do what's best for you, but you also need to help them help you get there, right? And so a lot of this exercise of like coming up with a plan is to also work with the stakeholders you have access to kind of make that happen. And then lastly, also having an exit plan, right? I think at some point you also have to be candid with yourself to be like, you can either grow within the organization or you can grow outside, right? So I think really having that honest conversation where like, have I tried all levers and all channels within my organization to make that growth plan happen? And when is that checkpoint where I really need to sit down and have that hard assessment to be like, okay, all doors are closed. And so I need to open new ones, but I'm going to do it outside. So I think, yeah, that's been the kind of playbook that's worked for me before.
You mentioned the Einstein Visa and EB-1A several times. Like, tell me more about that. What is that, and help demystify some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe I'll just set a little bit of context on the EB-1A green card itself first. So essentially, this is a employment-based immigration pathway, which by the textbook definition is reserved for people who really have established themselves as being at the top of their field. Right. So this is essentially to say like, hey, there's a very niche domain area, which is of national interest for the US, is an area that's perceived to have a direct benefit to the US economy. And this individual has objectively proven themselves to be at the top of their game. Right. So that's like the premise of this EB-1A green card in a nutshell. This is actually something that is open to all domains, right? So you have people who are scientists, you have people who are artists, entertainment folks, musicians, like the whole spiel, right? So everyone and anyone is welcome to apply, but the criteria essentially stay the same. So there's like 10 criteria that have been defined by USCIS, where you have 10 ways to essentially prove your leadership and like your sort of esteemed status in a field. And of which you have to meet at least 3 criteria to be granted this green card, right? So that's like the premise of the process. Now, a lot of immigrants today, I think, know about this because there's been a lot that's happened in the community to spread the word. But 6 years ago, when I actually kind of started exploring, immigration options, it was really kind of out of frustration, right? Because I think I realized at one point that, hey, there's only so much you can do on an H-1B visa. Also, like, you're so heavily tied to your employer because, if you lose your job, you typically lose your status. And then that puts tremendous pressure on trying to like figure out your next best path. And oftentimes immigrants are pushed to making like bad career choices, not because they want to, but because they don't have, any other pathways. So I think that's when I really started to explore like, hey, what else is out there? I don't want to accept no for an answer, and I don't want to accept status quo as an answer. So let me start doing my research to see what else exists out there. And so I think for me, I was glad to have, been in circles where I was exposed to some people who actually had pursued this path and had been successful. And so really try to understand what playbooks they followed, like what was their process, how did they go about this, what have they done in their careers that have helped them get to that point. And then really started to do a lot of positioning, right? So like looked internally to see, okay, what are things that I've done within my field that can be positioned as being extraordinary, right? Quote unquote. And then also, how do I come up with a game plan to then position this in an objective way with a legal firm to then represent my case to USCIS? And so I think this is why I'm actually very grateful for sticking the course in digital health and kind of staying true to this field, because one is obviously like healthcare has a direct impact for being of national interest, and obviously like healthcare has a direct tie to like the country's economy, right? So being in that field, I think naturally kind of put me a little bit more of a favorable spot. But also having like very measurable and tangible accomplishments in the space, right? So as I said, like I've worked on, AI-based diagnostic solutions that have been FDA approved and are serving like millions of patients in the US. I've also worked on like very novel, like 0 to 1 type products, which didn't exist before, have been like market makers in the space, right? Again, making tremendous impact, maybe not in terms of like user base, but like have been widely published and widely cited in the industry, right? So really kind of looking internally to see what are projects that I can position to really, enable me to be represented as being in the top of my field, and then really working with a strong attorney who could then put these pieces together into a case. So I think when I went through this process, I was honestly super skeptical. I think I was probably one of the very few PMs at the time who had even pursued this path. In fact, I was turned on by a lot of lawyers being like, hey, this is not even a path for product managers. Like you maybe can go do like international, like EB1C or whatever, right? So anyway, so I think at the end of the day, like, I was pretty successful, got my approval and, have my green card, and soon will be on a path to like getting citizenship. But I decided not to stop there, right? Because I think there was so many learnings that had been developed over the course of this process that I was like, hey, if I've been through this and I've done all this research, I want to give back, right? I'm sure there's like thousands or probably millions of people like me who want to like get out of this like shell. So I essentially started opening up my time to meet with immigrants, help them discover this path. And I've, over the course of the last 3.5 years, I've helped over 500 immigrants, pursue this path. And honestly, this has been like, outside of like helping patients and clinicians, I think this has been the most kind of altruistic thing in terms of like just being able to make an impact in the immigrant community.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a common problem I see with folks that I work with. They tell me, hey, can you help me in that one? I'm like, I can't. But if I could, that'd be worth a lot to you in terms of just life change. Like it changes every single thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk a bit more about consumer tech and healthcare, since you've been on both sides and basically at the intersection of both. Tell me, what does consumer tech get right that maybe healthcare needs to adopt?
Great question. I want to say, I think 2 things, right? So the first thing is because consumer tech as an industry is not often bound by regulatory or legal constraints, they're able to operate at a much faster pace and are also able to be a lot more iterative in their development process, right? On the contrary, healthcare is definitely slow. Like, I think it's not a myth, it's very real. Healthcare is slow, right? Like, as much as there's a desire to be, be in a position to like absorb the latest and greatest technical advancements and be able to move quickly in terms of go to market, we are stifled by a lot of constraints, right? And honestly, like I've been in companies where we only released products like twice a year for this reason, because like every time we had to think about it, and these are software products, I'm not even talking like hardware, right? Because again, there's a lot of constraints that go into deciding when something is ready for launch. So I think in terms of like what consumer tech gets right, I think it's the ability to be really iterative with product development. And I think this is honestly like very, very, essential for healthcare products as well, where I would say about half the industry is still very waterfall. And I think this is something that needs to desperately change to ensure that innovation can happen at least at a faster pace than it is already happening in consumer tech. And we're able to serve patients and clinicians at a much faster rate. I think that's like the biggest thing that comes to mind. And I think the second thing is, and again, this is probably not as much a problem today because I think a lot of healthcare companies have adapted to this mindset, but I think following a human-centered design process is still something that has a massive opportunity for healthcare to like step up on. You'll be surprised to see, like, even for that matter, I don't want to call out like names publicly, but if you look at a lot of like tools that clinicians use today, including like the tool that they spend the most amount of time on, which is like the medical record, it is a beast, right? Like that is really when you start to develop empathy for doctors, where you're like, oh my God, you have to stare at that thing for like, I don't know, 5 hours a day. Like that's painful, right? And this is like exclusive like time where they're looking in the EMR and like doing workflows and things like that. So I think the human-centered design aspect is extremely core to what makes, software products in consumer tech stick. And so I think that needs to be, I think, incorporated in a much more deeper way within the healthcare industry as well.
How about the other side of things? So what can health teach consumer PMs?
I would say because of all the constraints that go into building products in healthcare, I do feel like healthcare PMs are a lot more thick-skinned, so to speak. Like, oh, we can deal with any and all kinds of constraints that are thrown our way because we've probably seen it all, right? And so I think operating under very, very deep constraints that cannot be changed and being able to still be, iterative and still do the best that you can do for your product, I think is a mindset that I think consumer PMs can also adopt, consumer tech PMs can adopt. The second thing I would also say is that the emphasis on outcomes, as I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, I think really puts a lot of things in perspective, right? I mean, again, I'm all for metrics. Like, I love product metrics. I think it's critical for us to look at metrics to understand the health of a product. But sometimes it's not about the metrics, right? You might have all the right metrics on your dashboard and you might have all the right KPIs in place. But at the end of the day, if your product is not making impact in terms of what really matters for these users from a health perspective, there is no point. So I think that is something that healthcare PMs know really well from the start. They're like, even if let's say our growth numbers don't look great, like as long as we are able to get more hospital systems to use this technology, right? Or we're able to sign more contracts, like even that is a win because that enables us to scale to like more patients, right? So I think at the end of the day, I would say, like, to summarize, focus on, being able to deliver even within constraints, and then also being very, very razor focused on outcomes over outputs.
Let's end with maybe something fun. What's your favorite AI use case outside of health?
I would say content creation. So fun fact, I actually have like a fashion page on Instagram where, I post like get ready with me videos. Like I'm a huge fashion buff. So I've been using AI quite a bit to generate scripts, think about, video ideas, and then also with editing and voiceovers. So I think for me, that's like been a very fun journey.
Very cool. One product that inspires you right now?
Yeah, so I've actually been playing around with Perplexity's Comet quite a bit, and really trying to get more into the agentic AI workflow as a consumer. And I've actually been very, very impressed with all the things I can get done having that agentic workflow embedded within a browser. I mean, even from like very simple things like, auto responding to emails, doing, bookings, right? Like, for example, the other day, my family and I decided to go for a day trip to Tahoe, and I just, had Comet make a lot of these bookings for me, right? Which was super cool and really felt empowered as a parent because you're always strapped for time. So yeah, I think that's definitely something I've been enjoying lately.
What's a book that changed how you lead?
Yeah, so when I took on my first role as a manager or a people manager, I got my hands on Making of a Manager by Julie Zhu. And it's such a great book. I think, first of all, it was so relatable because I think a lot of the problems she talked about are like things that I had experienced as a first-time manager and had been really confused about. And so a lot of the advice was very like takeaway style things that I could actually take and implement in my day to day. And I think it really also shaped my thinking as a leader. Like, even if like I'm not a people manager right now, I've been able to like really live with a lot of those mindset shifts in my current role as well.
And then one last question, which is one thing you wish every product manager would stop doing, and maybe one thing you wish they start doing or do more of.
I might get in trouble for saying this, but like on the stop doing list, I would say let's have PMs stop obsessing over numbers and quantitative metrics on their resumes. I've like been in the in the seat of hiring like several PMs, and I've gone through like, I don't know, over 1,000 resumes in the last 3 years. And oh my God, every time I see like this number like soup, I'm like, well, I can't even figure out what did you actually do? Like, I see all these numbers. I see like, increase this by 40%, like grew, like engagement by 25%. But what does that really mean? Like, what was the actual outcome of what you built? So I would say like maybe let's start being more human and like focus more on the value creation aspect rather than just the numbers. And of course, the numbers help that story, then great. But let's not make our resumes number soups. So I think that's maybe the first thing I would say, like, let's maybe do less of. And then I think, yeah, in terms of doing more of, I would say, I think, talk about your work, right? I think this is again, a new mindset shift that I think is starting to be widely adopted in the industry now. And I'm glad that a lot more PMs are like taking, their LinkedIns more seriously. They're talking about their work, they're sharing, they're doing all these things in the community to spread the word. And again, there are two reasons why I think that's important, right? One is obviously the most obvious reason, which is, yeah, like the more you talk about your work, the more people discover you, the more, you get to kind of, stand out from the crowd. But the second thing is it also really helps create engagement and learnings for others, right? Because oftentimes, like if I'm looking to connect with someone with expertise in a topic, like it's very hard to know what someone's really an expert at unless I see their posts and I see the depth of what they write about, because that's really what demonstrates like, okay, do you really know your thing, or are you just like, making stuff up? And especially in this era of AI where I feel like many LinkedIn posts are AI generated, how do you really differentiate signal from noise? So again, if you are really passionate about your craft and if you're really proud of the work you do, or if you have something, knowledge on something you want to share, my advice to PMs would be like, go forward and like write about it, right? Talk about your work. I think that's the best way to like stand out as a PM, but also like build community and build learnings.
And speaking of knowledge sharing, where can people learn more from you and follow you?
Yeah, great question. So I typically do a lot of my kind of sharing and knowledge sharing and posting on LinkedIn, albeit I've not been the most active the last few months because it's been summer and life gets in the way. But I think that's definitely the main kind of place to get to really know what I'm doing. I also do write on Medium, especially around immigration and, putting content out there to help other people discover the EB1A. So so LinkedIn and Medium, I think, would be kind of the main modalities of getting in touch.
We'll be sure to put both links in the show notes. So anybody watching, listening, you can always find these in the show notes. So first of all, thank you so much, Anu, for joining this show. Been incredible. Your journey is super inspiring. I learned so much about consumer, healthcare, and immigration. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Awesome. No, thank you so much again, Shobit, for having me on the show, and absolute pleasure to be here.
And then for everyone, if you're listening, you're ready to step to the next level as a product leader, especially in high stakes industries, tech. This is exactly the kind of conversation you need to be studying. So make sure you follow me as well, and then keep tuning into the Intentional Product Manager podcast. Leave a review, share it with someone. That's the only way we grow. I highly appreciate it. And until next time, just stay intentional. Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.